rises as opposed to unleavened bread, which is for Passover. They call it the Seder meal for Passover. This is not the Passover, even though when Jesus was speaking on this in Luke chapter 22, when he said, "With great desire I have desired to have this meal with you before I suffer." This is what Jesus was dealing with. And he's really bringing together three concepts, three meals. And they had never had anything like that, and I think it helps us to understand, because it's not the Seder meal, which is Passover. This is the Shabbat meal, which is every Friday. Every Friday. Okay? Now, first of all, the braided bread, there are things in the Jewish culture, they don't even understand why. The Seder meal has 3 breads. The middle one is striped and hidden, which is representative of Jesus Christ beaten. And he was among them and did not know, and they needed to seek him out. But in the Shabbat bread, it is risen. It does have yeast, so it does rise. It's not unleavened bread. But in the Shabbat bread, there are 3 strands of bread that are braided together. And in these 3 strands, as they rise together and as they are baked, you lose the aspect of which braid goes where. You lose the aspect of, well, let me put it this way. A lot of people want to try to divide and they want to deal with the 3, but when it comes to the Shabbat, they become one. Okay? Were there 3 braids in here? Yes, but they become one. So it's important for us to understand this. Now, the third meal that he brings in, that is related to, is brought out in this story that Simon told us at the Shabbat meal. And that is the marriage supper of the Lamb. Because they still have a celebration, though they may not understand it. They still honor in God, but they don't understand all the details. And so we will probably both have some things to say, because she's going to bring up parts that spoke to her the most, and I will bring out my factual aspects that I remember and bring into some detail to it. Because that's our giftings. And to help out with it, being as she said, because Simmentov was the good Jewish man, I will get into my best Jewish voice to tell the story. So Simmentov was telling us how this aspect came about, because when his disciples sat down with Jesus, Jesus told them, first of all, Luke 22:15, "With great desire I have desired to have this supper with you." Because he said, "I will not partake of this till all be fulfilled in the kingdom." It meant something to them, but they didn't understand. Then he began to explain in his discourses, he's describing what's very familiar with us in our Christendom about the factor of this bread represents his body, which was shed. This wine represents, or it is the juice of the grape, which was crushed. It's broken. Here it is. It's presented to you. So it's something or other that they were looking at one another, and they were beginning to be confused at the conversation, because some things to them in their Jewish mind, they knew the references, but they didn't understand the connection yet. So he began to describe. When he was talking, you know the story very well, where he says, "As often as you do this, do it in remembrance of me." And by this point, the disciples are scratching their heads saying, I don't understand what he could mean by this, because we're all men here. Because the reference referred to a very Jewish custom and culture. Something that Jazz, I was thinking about, she will recognize some pieces of this. Because in the Jewish culture, the man and woman were to be engaged. We know this in the story of Mary and Joseph, and it says, and She was espoused to him. And as she was espoused to him, she was found pregnant, and he was going to put her aside privately, which was an aspect of divorcement. Now, in our culture, we don't understand it. That means you're engaged, you just break up. Not in their culture. It is a covenant that would go back to the factor that even the girl would have been very young, likely, and the man quite older, and he would be hidden back. If he was a young man especially, he would be hidden back behind the lattice. And in the Song of Solomon, it speaks of my beloved speaking behind the lattice. He's looking for her. He's looking at her and watching. And here is another part of the story. She's over at a location with her family, and she's presented at the table. And before her, and I'm just going to get this out right now to help give the visual, is a cup. Now, it would be a lot larger cup than this. And in this cup is the juice, the crushed grape that is poured out there, that he has presented. And quite often, they had a cloth, and it's covered over. And he's hiding back behind the lattice, but he's watching her. And as she's standing there in her engagement attire, which is very big presentation that they do, to be espoused, to be prepared, because that means you're in covenant from that day forward when you understand the Jewish culture. And so she's there, and she's looking, and she's waiting, and people come up to her, and they would say, "Oh, he's such a handsome fellow. You're going to love him. He's wonderful. He's got a great personality." Others would come up and said, "He comes from a good home. He will treat you wonderful." Many people would come up, and that know him, and they would come by, and they would give a witness of his goodness. This is the reference we also learn of being a good witness, because they are to come by and tell the bride to be how good the one that she is to love is. Because she doesn't partake of the cup because he has presented the cup here in advance. It's covered and it's waiting. Because as he's looking through the lattice, she knows he's over there and he's hidden. But he's watching her. He's there and he's watching what she's going to do. Every move. How is she behaving? When this one comes up, he's rehearsed often with others because he has good relationship with. And he has told them, tell her this. Tell her, I will have 2 chickens. All right, 2 cows. I will have there in our home. It will be blessed. And so he's expressing. So the people come up and they said, he already has this in order. He already has a cow, milk cow. He has chickens. He has these things. You're not going to go hungry. So he's expressing. So while she is contemplating all the things that the people are coming by, she looks at the cup. He's anxiously looking. Will she partake of my cup? Will she take the cup and drink? Because once she uncovers the cup and she takes it up and she drinks of the cup, her answer is in her drinking of the cup. Her answer is, yes, I will marry him. When the people have come by and given witness, given testimony of his goodness, how much they love him. And in this story that Simmentorf was telling us, he says, if people would ever understand, especially with the Jewish people, but especially, we need to, everyone, share with others how good he is. The things that we know, how wonderful, how he takes care of us. The things that he has provided. Share with others and convince them to be part of the bride. Because the story of the cup, when he said, as oft as you do this, the confusing part to the disciples at the time came from the standpoint of that when the girl took the cup, she drank. Everybody celebrated, but she did not go home with him. She went home with her parents, and she took the cup that he provided. She took the cup home, and as often, whether it was daily, weekly, however, as she's preparing for the years coming up to the time of her becoming the bride, when he comes for her, as she has been preparing, she takes the cup out, she fills it up, and she looks at it in remembrance of all the things that the people have told her. When I get married, I'm going to be provided for. I have a mansion waiting on me. When I am married to my groom, I will have no more sickness or disease. I will not have lack. I will not know loneliness, because he will never leave me or forsake me. So when preparing time after time, week after week, month after month, she comes back to that cup, because this cup has been given to her in remembrance. So as the time approaches, she's taken this cup. The date is approaching. She may not know exactly when the date is. That seems odd to us in our Western culture, but she may not know what the date is, but she has learned many things. One of the things that she learns, Marilyn, if you would hand me that, please, is that there is the witness that comes with the groom. The groom and the voice of the witness, and the witness comes with the shofar to blast. Where is my bride? And they blow the trumpet, and the witness comes alongside, and they run through the streets, and it will become a very known custom amongst the Jewish people that the witness, what we would look at as the best man, and the groom go through the streets, and everyone comes to their window and look and says, oh, it's wedding day. They're going to be married today because he's come. She may not know the time. She may not know the day, but she has been preparing all this time. As oft as you do this, we have taken it in our Western culture to say, well, however often you want to, that it just, no, that's not what he's saying. He said, every time that you come, I want you to take my cup of the New Testament. And every time that you take it, I want you to remember the goodness of God. I want you to remember all the things that I have said. I will provide for you. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. He's telling them, this is the story of the bride and the groom. This is the story, and the Shabbat meal tells a further explanation. And again, Jesus mixed these three meals together, which was something very perplexing for the disciples. They had understanding of what these three meals meant, and they had not been put together, but God is saying here, I am meshing, I'm pushing these things together, because the ultimate concept of communion is Jesus Christ and his bride. Do you have anything you want to add?
So when Jesus was sitting with the disciples and he began to tell about the cup and the bread, they were so confused, because at least that's the Jewish perspective, because they were like, there's no women here, and as Pastor Allen had said, there's no women here, and so therefore, why is he telling us this story of what we call communion? And the witnesses, Simantov said, was a representative of like the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is always with the bride. And so, or with the groom, with the groom, and the Holy Spirit is always witnessing to the bride of the groom. The Holy Spirit is always telling us he teaches us all things about the groom. And so when the groom came to get the bride and the shofar was blown, as you read in the scriptures, and it talks about the coming of Christ, and it says that a trumpet blasts when he comes. It's the same thing as what they do traditionally, even to this day. They do this whole tradition when they're getting married. The bride sits with the cup and she decides if she's going to marry him. When she drinks, it means that she has taken covenant. So now she's in covenant, even though she isn't technically with him, in the same way that we're not technically in heaven with him yet, but we are covenant with him now. So when you drink of the cup, you're actually drinking of your covenant that this is my groom and I am his bride. He's coming after me and I'm going to live with him for eternity. And so then when the groom comes with the witness, the Holy Spirit, they blow the shofar, they go down into the streets in Jewish culture and they begin to holler, "Where's my bride? Where's my bride?" Now, the story that Simantov, he said, now I will tell you why the story of the 10 virgins means so much. Because now we're like, we didn't tie that all together with communion. But he says in their culture, it's all tied together because now they're looking, and it's usually at nighttime. They're going down the streets and they're hollering for the bride. And so the only way that he knows that it's her house is if her light is on. If her lamp is lit. And so he told us, he said, now when you read about the story of the 10 virgins, it makes sense to you. You know, when you're hearing it, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, it's a good story. But now you understand the groom is coming and he's going down the streets. It's the night of your wedding. And if you don't have oil in your lamp, then he doesn't know what house to stop at.
Oh.
And so the interesting thing that really touched me is the factor that in the Jewish culture, they still do this whole ceremony and yet don't know that Jesus is the groom. So many of them. And yet they go through these rituals. They knew that he was telling it. They knew that it meant somebody's coming, but they haven't got the story that this was him. And this cup is our covenant with him. And so now, every time I take communion, I'm reminded of covenant. When Alan and I got married, we put rings on, showing outwardly our covenant. And with Christ, every time we take this cup, we are saying, I remember the covenant I've made with you. I'm staying with you. I'm going to be ready when you get here.
Yes.
I'm waiting on you. I'm waiting to hear the shofar. Yeah. I'm waiting to hear the blast. I'm waiting for you and the Holy Spirit to come. And my lamp is ready. I have the oil. I'm so prepared because I'm in covenant.
Yeah.
In the Jewish culture, Simantov said sometimes these children are 7 years old when they drink at the cup.
Little
girls. 7 years old. And they may not get married then until they're 15, 18, 20, or whatever. And so they have these years that they sit with this cup.
Typically 7 years.
He said typically it's 7 years. And for 7 years, they partake of the cup of covenant and remember everything that the witnesses told her because she hasn't seen him yet. We haven't seen Jesus face to face. But the Holy Spirit reveals him to us constantly of who he is so that we will continue to partake of the covenant cup.